It's June 11th, 1962. The sun is setting over San Francisco Bay, casting long shadows across the concrete corridors of America's most notorious federal prison. Three men are lying in their cells, but they're not sleeping. They're listening, waiting. Because tonight, after months of meticulous planning, they're going to attempt something that the federal government swore was impossible. They're going to escape from Alcatraz. Alcatraz. Just the name sends a shiver down your spine. The Rock, America's supermax, long before the term existed. Sitting out there in the freezing, swirling currents of San Francisco Bay, it wasn't just a prison, it was a statement. A statement that said, "You are done. You are finished. There is no getting out of here." From the day it opened its doors as a federal penitentiary in 1934 until the day it closed in 1963, 36 men tried to escape from Alcatraz. Most were caught, some were shot, and some drowned. The official record is crystal clear. No one ever successfully escaped Alcatraz. This is the story of the only successful escape attempt in Alcatraz's 29-year history as a federal prison. Or was it? That question has haunted American law enforcement for over 60 years. And tonight, we're diving deep into every twist, turn, and tantalizing clue of this incredible tale. The Rock sets the stage. First, let's talk about why Alcatraz was considered escape-proof. Sitting in the middle of San Francisco Bay, surrounded by frigid waters and treacherous currents, The Rock wasn't just a prison, it was America's answer to the country's most dangerous criminals. Al Capone did time here. Machine Gun Kelly called it home. If you ended up on Alcatraz, you weren't just any criminal. You were the kind that made headlines and gave FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover nightmares. The prison operated on a simple philosophy: maximum security, minimum privilege. One former guard described it perfectly. You could count on three things at Alcatraz: the fog, the cold, and the fact that nobody was getting off this island without permission. But here's what makes this story so quintessentially American. It took a bank robber from Oklahoma, a car thief from Boston, and a burglar from Washington, D.C. to prove that American ingenuity and determination could overcome even the most impossible odds. Frank Morris was the mastermind. Born in Washington, D.C. and abandoned as a child, Morris had been in and out of institutions his entire life. But don't mistake him for just another career criminal. This man had an IQ of 133, putting him in the top 2% of the population. Then there were the Anglin brothers, John and Clarence. These Georgia farm boys turned to bank robbery during the Great Depression, and they brought something special to the table. They were diggers. Back home, they'd learned to tunnel through Georgia clay that was harder than concrete. Prison walls? That was just a different kind of dirt to them. The fourth man was Alan West, a car thief from New York who'd been in and out of Alcatraz twice. West had the connections, the knowledge of the prison's routines, and most importantly, he had access to the prison workshop where he could borrow tools without anyone asking questions. The plan takes shape. It started with a simple observation that would make any American proud. These men refused to accept that their situation was hopeless. In December 1961, Morris noticed something interesting about the ventilation grates in their cells. The salt air from San Francisco Bay had been slowly corroding the concrete around these grates for nearly 30 years. What happened next reads like something out of a Hollywood movie, but remember, this was real life, and the stakes couldn't have been higher. Using stolen spoons, improvised chisels, and a makeshift drill powered by a vacuum cleaner motor, these four men began the painstaking process of widening the ventilation holes in their cells. Every night, after lights out, they would chip away at the concrete, one grain at a time. But here's the genius part. They knew the sound of chiseling would give them away. So Morris, drawing on that high IQ of his, came up with a solution that could only work in America, land of the free and home of the brave. They would time their digging to coincide with the prison's music hour, when inmates were allowed to play instruments. The sound of Morris's accordion, yes, he actually played accordion, masked the sound of their escape preparations. American ingenuity at its finest. What these men accomplished with limited resources would make any engineer proud. They created lifelike dummy heads using soap, toilet paper, and real hair collected from the prison barbershop. These weren't crude decoys, they were works of art that could fool a casual inspection in dim light. They constructed life preservers and the raft using over 50 raincoats stolen from other inmates and visitors. Prison-issued raincoats, mind you, the same government that tried to keep them locked up inadvertently provided their means of escape. Morris even figured out how to secretly test their raft. During exercise periods, he would partially inflate sections and hide them in the prison's workshop, checking for leaks and making repairs. This wasn't just desperation, this was methodical, brilliant planning. June 11, 1962. The plan was in motion. Around 9:30 p.m., after the final bed check, Morris and the Anglin brothers squeezed through the holes they'd spent months enlarging. These holes were barely 9 inches wide by 13 inches tall. Imagine trying to fit through a space smaller than a standard piece of paper. But these men were motivated by something more powerful, the American dream of freedom. They climbed through the prison's ventilation system, a maze of pipes and ducts that would challenge a professional spelunker. But they navigated it in complete darkness, guided only by Morris's mental map of the prison's layout. On the roof, they assembled their raft and life preservers, then descended the prison's exterior wall using improvised ropes. By 10 p.m., they were in the water, paddling away from Alcatraz toward the mainland. Meanwhile, Alan West was stuck in his cell. The concrete around his ventilation grate had hardened differently than the others, and he couldn't squeeze through. The man who had helped plan the entire escape was left behind, a cruel twist of fate that probably saved his life but denied him his freedom. The next morning, June 12th, guards discovered the dummy heads in their beds. The official manhunt began immediately, involving the FBI, U.S. Coast Guard, Bureau of Prisons, and local law enforcement. It was one of the largest manhunts in American history. They found pieces of the raft on nearby Angel Island. They found a paddle floating in the bay. They found personal effects that had belonged to the escapees. But Morris and the Anglin brothers? They vanished as completely as if they'd never existed. Here's where the story gets truly fascinating. In 1975, Robert Checkey was sailing near Alcatraz when he spotted something in the water. It was a packet wrapped in plastic containing photographs of the Anglin brothers. The photos showed them as older men, suggesting they'd not only survived the escape, but lived for years afterward. The FBI dismissed the photos as fake, but the mystery deepened. For decades, the FBI maintained that the three men had drowned in San Francisco Bay. The water temperature that night was 54 degrees, cold enough to cause hypothermia within hours. The currents were treacherous, the distance to shore was over a mile, and they were using a makeshift raft. But here's what makes this story so compelling. There's no definitive proof they died. In 2003, Mythbusters tested the escape plan and concluded it was possible to survive. In 2014, a computer analysis of tidal patterns suggested the escapees could have made it to shore if they left at the right time. Dutch scientists in 2014 ran detailed simulations and concluded that if the men left between 11 p.m. and midnight, they had a decent chance of reaching the Marin County shoreline.